New York Giants. Not great. I have them going 4-13, which is 2 wins better than your 2-15 prediction. Obviously, we both have them missing the playoffs. Talk to me about the Giants. Where do you think they're at? Give me an offensive MVP for this team.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm worried. It's a quarterback. It could be a quarterback issue with Daniel Jones struggling last year and now coming off a torn ACL. The lowest graded offensive line in the league. At receiver, we've got some guys who are young and have ability but are unproven. Malik Neighbors might be their best receiver already. We've seen that a little bit in the preseason. But when you have this big of issues at quarterback and on the offensive line, and honestly, I'm a little worried about their secondary too, losing their best player in Xavier McKinney. Got a lot of young players back there, especially at corner. There's a lot of things that I struggle with here, but I think the offensive MVP for me is Andrew Thomas, and he's the one offensive lineman, as long as he's healthy, that I can rely on. I'm waiting on the rest of the guys. I believe Evan Neal actually got benched in favor of Jermaine Illuminor. I need John Michael Schmitz to step up at center, but while the rest of the 4 guys figure it out, Andrew Thomas is a constant, right? A 90.3 overall grade in 2022. Dealt with some injuries last year, only played 10 games. That grade dropped to a 76.1. But when he's healthy, he's one of the best pass protectors in football. Solid in the run game. I think he's worth every penny that he makes. He gave him the contract extension. He's the anchor of this offensive line. I'm not sure if the rest of the boat is there for sure, but he's certainly the anchor. Thomas, to me, is their offensive MVP, their most valuable player. Just you saw it when he went down, the games that he was out last year, they couldn't block anybody, and they had a hard time blocking people even with him in the lineup. But I think a healthy season from Thomas, he returns to that elite form while they figure out everything else around him.
Yeah, they did what they could on the offensive line, right? Brought some new guys in via free agency, and they're hoping some guys take some steps up this year. So the offensive line, in theory, should be better than the worst in the NFL that it was last year. But we'll see. Obviously, it's a massive question mark for them. My offensive MVP is going to be Malik Neighbors, because if this team's going to do anything at all whatsoever, it's going to be through Malik Neighbors. And I also feel as though I hate to put like this lofty of expectations on a guy who hasn't even played a down of real regular season football yet, but he also feels quarterback proof for their depth chart, right? Like, he's going to be wide receiver 1 if Daniel Jones is the quarterback, if Drew Lock is the quarterback, if Tommy DeVito is the quarterback. Like, that's who they're going to run their entire passing attack through. And I think he has a skill set, whether it's the short yards after catch stuff, whether it's deep down the sideline, whether it's over the middle. Like, they're going to get this guy the football because he moves differently. His separation percentile that you saw last year really like goes into this, just how effective of a football player he is. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Jaden Daniels at all whatsoever in the year that he had, but Malik Neighbors could have won the Heisman, it felt like, if Jaden Daniels wasn't going to win it, just because of how good he is. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that he could have a year close to when Odell Beckham Jr. won Rookie of the Year for this team back in 2014, and that was like a 1,300-yard, 12-touchdown season. Now, touchdowns are tough to replicate that many touchdowns in a rookie season, but I think we could be talking about easily over 1,000 yards, somewhere near double-digit touchdowns. And if this team wants to surprise at all whatsoever, this is the thing. It's going to be because Malik Neighbors is basically going to win Offensive Player of the Year. I don't really know how else it happens for this team. So that's why I think that he's got to be their MVP. What about defensive MVP?
I think it's just their best player. It's the one guy who's a constant. I think now that Aaron Donald is retired, he's in the conversation for the best defensive tackle in the league. That's Dexter Lawrence, man. He led all defensive tackles with a 92.9 overall grade and a 92.6 pass rush grade. He's just a 340-pound monster in the middle in there. He's unblockable. He's a center's worst nightmare. 65 total pressures plus an 89.5 run D grade. He's just there's only so much I can think to say about him, honestly, because he's just so good at what he does in both pass rush and run D. One of the most well-rounded players in football. In the argument, I know a lot of people probably lean Chris Jones, future Hall of Famer. I get that, but Dexter Lawrence may be the best defensive tackle in the league. And the one reason that their front seven, I mean, probably not the only reason. I know they made a big trade for Brian Burns. They have Kayvon Thibodeau, but he glues that whole front seven together. I mean, he just is a brick wall inside. The one thing you still can't do on the Giants is run between the tackles on them, and it's because of Dexter Lawrence.
Lawrence is a stud. There's no doubt about it. In terms of their best defensive players, you nailed it. He is that guy. I think the defensive MVP has to come from someone other than Lawrence because I already know Lawrence is going to be elite. Somebody else has to step up. And you go trade for Brian Burns this past year. It's time for Brian Burns to have his best year yet. I'm not saying that Brian Burns has been bad throughout his NFL career, but I think for the hype that he had where he was drafted in the middle of the first round, I think people are still waiting for that next step when it came to Brian Burns. If you look at this Giants defensive line, no edge rusher on the Giants had a pass rush win percentage above 7%, Dalton. No edge rusher had a pass rush win rate above 7. Normally, when I'm trying to contextualize how bad a pass rush group is, I bring it to double digits. I say, nobody had more than double digits. I can't even get above 7. I can't even get above 7% from what we had last year. That was last year from the Giants. Burns hasn't had a pass rush win percentage over 13.5 in his career, and that's that next step. I'm trying to let's get Burns above 15%. That'd be a great year for Brian Burns. But all that to say, Burns' floor of a pass rush win percentage is 10%. His floor of what he's going to do is better than what the Giants had last year. So if he is an impactful edge rusher for them, you throw in Dexter Lawrence, obviously, and I'm going to get to a breakout player in a second. This defensive line, in theory, could be great. But somebody's got to step up in a major way. Multiple people, in my opinion, have to step up in a major way. Outside of Dexter Lawrence, the most likely candidate is Brian Burns, and I need that from him this year for them to have the defensive line that they need. But what about breakout candidate? I'm going to go back to the defensive trenches for mine, but what about for you? Who's a breakout candidate?
I'm going to go to the secondary and last year's first-round pick, Deonte Banks. Look, I think this is a really talented player. I think physically he's really, really talented, and I think he was put in a lot of bad spots, especially early last year. First half of last year was putting a lot of press man looks. They had Wink Martindale, who's notably aggressive in his defenses, a lot of blitzing, a lot of cover one, a lot of press man coverage, and Banks, I think he was put in that spot so much in press coverage against often shadowing the other team's best receiver because they didn't have a whole lot at corner last year outside of him. A decent year last year, made some adjustments, and I think as Martindale went to a little bit more zone coverage later in the year, Banks got a little bit more comfortable. He still put him in a lot of press even late in the year, but I saw him, he just looked more comfortable away from just press man every single play. Sit back in 3 a little bit, make some plays on the ball in zone coverage, see the football. And I think with Shane Bowen now coming in as their new defensive coordinator with Wink Martindale going down to Michigan, it's a lot heavier zone defense, and maybe at times he'll still play man some percentage of the time, but it's not going to be like it was with Martindale. I think Banks is going to be a lot more comfortable in Shane Bowen's scheme and not feel that pressure of having to be like, oh, I've just stepped in here and I'm the number one corner. I have to shadow and press man like I'm Darrelle Revis. That's not how that works for most guys, right? The vast majority of guys, they're not Darrelle Revis, that's for sure. But Banks, I think
Buccaneer great.
I could see Buccaneer great. I could see a big improvement in a new scheme under Shane Bowen with Deonte Banks just allowed to use his vision along with his athleticism.
Yeah, no, I was a big fan of Deonte Banks coming out of Maryland. I thought he was a top 20 player in his class. So I think that he can be a CB1 in this league. So I am really looking forward to it. My breakout player, again, I'm going back to the Giants defensive line, Kayvon Thibodeau. And some people might be like, hey, Trev, he had 11.5 sacks last year. How's he a breakout candidate? You got to look between the lines. You got to dig into the weeds here when it comes to Kayvon Thibodeau. I went back this morning because I wanted to see this for sure as I was kind of filling out the notes for this show. I went back and I watched 11.5 sacks. It's not as many effort and cleanup sacks as I thought that I was going to see, but it's about half, to be honest with you. And the other half, I'll give him credit. Nice handwork, nice moves, actually really encouraging for this upcoming season. But that's what brings me to my point. 6.7% pass rush win percentage is not good enough for Kayvon Thibodeau. And I saw the flashes of what he's capable of in those half of his sacks that he got last year that were true one-on-one wins. We got to see him with way more regularity. I don't know if it's about necessarily him figuring out how to attack an offensive lineman a little bit better. And I'll be honest, he was sort of feasting on some of the lower tier offensive tackles that he was going up against last year for some of those one-on-one wins. You got to up your game. We got to get the passers win percentage above 10%. He was picked too high to not be at that point. He is too talented to not be at that point. And if instead now you go from a defensive line that didn't have a single double-digit passers win percentage player on the edge to now Dexter Lawrence in the middle, Brian Burns doing that at one side, and Kayvon Thibodeau doing that on the other, this is a completely different defense that we're talking about because of the pressure that you're able to generate on the pocket. So I think that's going to be a big deal for the New York Giants there. What about your team's best rookie? What do you got in this group?
I had to go with your MVP here, and that's Malik Neighbors.
Okay.
I'm in complete agreement. There's some good candidates on defense too. You talk about Drew Phillips and Tyler Nubin, right? But I think Neighbors, he's special. He's not just good, he's special, right? And I think there were some people who thought I didn't go in this boat, although I thought it was very close, who thought he might have been wide receiver 1 in this draft, but Marvin Harrison had the pedigree, but I think it's incredibly close. Neighbors after the catch is special. The deep threat, he was second in the FBS in receiving grade on 10-plus yard targets last year. He can just do everything. I mean, it's just, you just talk about 30 missed tackles for us last year, I think was a top 2 or 3 mark in the country. So efficient, a threat down the field, and he knows, I really like that he knows the stop and start is ridiculous, Trevor. I mean, the way he can go from full speed to 0, back out into a comeback route or a curl route, out into an out route, into an in route. I mean, he just can do it all. I think he's one of the most talented receivers in the entire league right now. And honestly, you mentioned snub for the awards. He didn't even win the Biletnikoff. Marvin Harrison won the Biletnikoff award, and I thought Neighbors should have won it. The numbers were just they were off the charts at LSU last year, obviously for Daniels, and he had Neighbors and Brian Thomas, but Malik Neighbors is a special talent, and even if the Giants struggle this year, it's going to feel like the best moments of their season come from Malik Neighbors. Look, if they can ever figure out whatever situation around him on offense, he's a special player, man.
I agree. I obviously had Neighbors as my offensive MVP, so I wasn't going to say him again for best rookie. I'll say Tyrone Tracy Jr., the hybrid running back player. I would say hybrid. I mean, he's a running back now, but played wide receiver for 4 years when he was in college at where was it before? It wasn't Illinois. Where was it? It was
Purdue.
Where did he play wide receiver at before he went to running back at Purdue?
I thought he was always at Purdue, and they just. Oh no, sorry. He was at Iowa. He was at Iowa. Yeah, he was.
Yes.
He played receiver at Iowa. Yeah, he did. Yep.
Yes, played receiver at Iowa for 4 seasons. Sort of just like could not really crack that wide receiver lineup at Iowa. Not a great passing offense to be a wide receiver, if we're being completely honest. And a coach who I think was coaching at Iowa or maybe recruited him throughout high school, ended up getting a job at Purdue, and they're like, hey, we want you to come over. We want you to play running back. He was a little bit hesitant to do that because he's like, all right, well, I got 1 year of eligibility left. If I come over and I play running back for you and I don't look good and I don't get on the field, my NFL dream is over. Like, I have no chance going to the NFL at all whatsoever. But he took a chance on himself. Ended up being a stud, 90.5 rushing grade last year for Purdue. And then obviously you saw some of that receiving ability out of the backfield as well. I think he is the most dynamic back that the Giants now have in their backfield. Now, Devin Singletary, obviously a little bit more veteran. He understands the offense a little bit more, being reunited with Brian Dable. I like Eric Gray as well as sort of a rotational back. But if you want the guy with the highest ceiling and the most dynamic athletic ability, I think Tyrone Tracy's your guy. So I think that he's going to get into the lineup. They're probably going to sprinkle him in a little bit throughout the beginning of the season. But second half of the season, man, they could be getting him into that lineup in a major way, maybe even in a starting role at some point. Who knows? I think that he might have that sort of a talent ceiling to him. But